welcome to our Slate webinar series. My name is Stephen Nickel. I'm Program Manager here at Technolutions. Today we're going to be talking about automations, specifically awesome automations. As you know, rules have become a big part of Slate over the past couple of years. And a lot of power has been given to you, the users, to do all sorts of crazy stuff. And so today we're going to talk about making that crazy stuff efficient. One of the big things that you can do to make your rules more efficient is to use exclusivity groups. That's going to be the big thing that brings everything together. And so using exclusivity groups is going to allow you to take a series of rules that may have, in the past taken a long time to run, make it much more efficient. And so when you do big updates, do retroactive refreshes, bring in big imports, you do not see any sort of slowdown when it comes to your instance. Exclusivity groups are, they're very important in Slate, and especially when it comes to using your rules. And the reasons why you want to use exclusivity groups and the reason why they make your rules more efficient is to basically be able to evaluate a set of rules in a particular order. In the process, the rules process, something to keep in mind, all your rules will be, in an exclusivity group will be evaluated by Slate, but the big difference is because the way you use exclusivity groups, you don't necessarily have to include filters in every single subsequent rule. So therefore, you can use less filters in your rules, and you can also use basically make them more efficient. Sorry. The priority groups, allow you to kind of weed out larger populations at a higher priority and work your way down. Enables the more efficient use, taking advantage of the no action option. So you don't have to repeat the same filter throughout the course of all your rules. So for example, if there's a particular group of students you wanted to exclude, as a population, you wouldn't have to necessarily say not in, citizenship of foreign national, every single rule in that exclusivity group. You could have a simple exclusivity group of if you're in international, do nothing or do no action. Again, this will help you to eliminate or statements in rules, and this exclusivity is also going to help allow you to eliminate the not statements, and those are two big killers of rules efficiency. So we always you never really want to use or statements or not in statements within rules. Using exclusivity groups will also help you prevent multiple updates to the student record, or what we call flip-flopping. If you have two rules that are outside, that aren't in an exclusivity group, a student may meet they're both affecting the same field. What happens when a student meets the criteria for both those rules? Well, Slate will randomly pick one whenever the student's record is updated, and basically assign that value, whatever that rule does to that student's record. And then when the record gets updated again, it can be flipped to the other value and vice versa. So using an exclusivity group allows you to basically have a whole lot of different rules that may affect a single field in Slate, but working through the exclusivity group, that you're only ever going to get one value assigned. So basically, it's important to make sure that in an exclusivity group, you're only ever going to be getting the one outcome, and that outcome should always be consistent. When it comes to building exclusivity groups, the actual construction exclusivity group is important, again, to make that exclusivity group maximize the efficiency of your rules. So there's a couple of things that you want to do. When you're building your exclusivity group, you always want to basically, all the rules within your exclusivity group should use the same population. And so when we're talking about population, we're talking about, if it's applicants versus inquiries versus organizations, or not inquiries, but applicants versus prospects, database versus organizations database, etc. We don't want to mix and match your populations. When it also comes to building out your exclusivity groups, we also don't want to mix and match the rule types. So we always want the same type of rule to be used. So in the case of, if all your rules are going to be in an exclusivity group are going to affect a field, they all need to share the same field. Or if all those rules in the exclusivity group are going to create an interaction, we want it to be, they all share the same interaction type. You wouldn't want to have an exclusivity group that had both field and interaction types in the same exclusivity group. Ways that always want to set distinct priorities for your rules as well, for each rules. The exclusivity group has a large priority list, and so you can go 1 to 1,000. And the main thing there is that you want to make sure that every rule within your exclusivity group has its own unique priority. If you're building out an exclusivity group with a set of rules, and you know that you may be adding to the set of rules in the future, it's always a good idea to leave some spacing between those priorities. So a lot of times you may have your number 1 priority rule, and then your next priority rule is a number 10. So as long as it's chronological, it should be evaluated in the same order. So 1 to 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50, etc. Would allow you to go back in and add additional rules in the future if they become necessary to stick between the 1 and the 10 or the 10 and the 20, etc. In your exclusivity group, all your rules should be using the same trigger when applicable. There's be certain types where you see that trigger is not a selectable option, but when the trigger is a selectable option, you want to make sure that that trigger is going to be the same. So either all your rules in your an exclusivity group are going to be the upon update or defer versus upon application submission or upon form submission, etc. But the idea is that they need to all be the same. You don't want to have a situation where you have a upon application submission rule mixed in an exclusivity group that have upon update or defer triggers. So when it comes to the populations themselves, we talked about you want to select all your exclusivity group rules should share the same population. So our populations are our query bases. And what these populations, this is your prospects query base, your applicants query base, your organization's query base. You want to make sure that all of your rules in the exclusivity group share the same query base, which again is the population. And in this case, something to know about the populations and very important to keep in mind is that the where clause on these query bases is dropped when it comes to the rules in building the rules. This is basically to say that your prospects query base is the same as your prospects including opt-outs query base because the opt-outs tag is not being taken into account because it's just getting dropped. We recommend, as a Slate best practice for when you're building your rules, to always use the prospects query base when it comes to person scoped items, and to always use the applications query base when it comes to application scoped items. You want to stay away from the applicants and prospects query base. You do not want to use those for your rules. You also don't want to use any custom query bases. Pretty much any custom query base that have been created in Slate for your own particular instance is going to have extraneous code that's added to it that could be detrimental to the performance of your rules if you use that query base. So you want to think through the population that you're going to be affecting, and with that population, you want to make sure you're using the appropriate query base. So again, prospects and applicants are your primary ones. The triggers that make up your rules. So again, kind of reiterating, you always want to make sure in an exclusivity group that all your rules are using the same trigger. We have the upon update defer trigger. This is kind of the standard one that majority of your rules will be using, and this is where a rule would fire basically within the 15 to 30 minute time frame. Basically, you update a record depending on what else is going on in your instance. You may see that rule kick off in 5 minutes. You may see it kick off in 15 minutes. You may see it kick off in 20 minutes. But they run in batches to help with efficiency overall. So that is just something to keep in mind with the update deferred rules. The upon person application update overnight processing. This is something that will fire in the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Time slot for any record that had an update in the previous day. So any single update will kind of queue up that record to be run in the overnight processing in that time frame. This is a good trigger to use if it's something that's not you don't need to see right away, and it's something that that can be maybe calculated and you can see it the next morning. The upon application submission only will fire when any basically Slate application is submitted. That is submitted via an import or the submission of a Slate hosted online application, or even when it is submitted via a application creation form. So basically that is something to keep in mind about the application submission rules, is that they will fire when any application is submitted in Slate. The form submission rules fire when any form is the form is submitted in Slate. The form submission rules can be created directly from the forms now. So, there's kind of no ambiguity about that. That when that population that basically is that form that you're building the rule on. So it is kind of, it's nice. That's something to keep in mind. Somebody, school has been around, notice it has been moved from the rules editor over to the forms themselves. So just to keep that in mind when you're building those. And again, population of that is going to be the population of the form that's being submitted. So there's no, there's a lot of times in those rules, there's no need to use filters like, the name of the form is submitted or not, etc. All right, so we're going to talk about some rules formulas here in a second. First, we're going to look at some examples of making some rules efficient in exclusivity groups. So here we have an example of a standard awaiting materials rule. This rule is, we see it is taking into account a lot of different, aspects of what makes a student awaiting materials application status. This is an example of something that you may see in a combined instance school where there's an undergraduate and a graduate population that both differ when it comes to what is awaiting materials and what is not. As you can see here, this is an example of an inefficient rule. Basically, we're looking at the period active, the application submission status, and the payment complete. So we're looking at these things. We're also then looking at if the checklist by section has been fulfilled or incomplete, etc. One second. So again, in this example, we're purposely showing you some things that we don't want to do. For example, the or statements or the period key not in something. This is going to be a very slow rule, and it may work when not much is going on in your instance, but the moment these things pick up, either through a big import or a retroactive refresh or something like that, you're going to see that you're going to see the problems pop up, or having a slow rule can be detrimental. So how do we take this rule and make it more efficient? And so you may think to yourself, well, adding more rules, does that really is that better than having one rule to do more? And in the case of exclusivity groups, yes, having more rules is going to be more efficient than having a single rule trying to do more things. So again, exclusivity groups is a way of basically, kind of working within that structure and that frame to make rules more efficient, even if you have more of them. So if we go out here and we look at the application statuses, we can kind of see how we take that one application status and we broke it up for the waiting materials, and we broke it up into 4 application statuses for waiting materials. And we'll look at the one at the higher priority. So at priority 30, this is where we hit our first application of waiting materials. In here, we see that we only have a single filter. We only have just the checklist items for reading, required for reading as incomplete filter. Nothing else. We're not looking at application submitted or application fee paid or any of that kind of stuff. We're looking solely at is this, does the student have or have not completed their required for reading checklist items? And the reason why we can get away with that is because of our priorities and because we're in an exclusivity group. If we go back out to our exclusivity group, we see that we're already addressing the awaiting submission folks up here higher at a rank 10. So the way the value, the rules would be evaluated is they would look at here and say if you're awaiting, if you have not submitted your application, then you're awaiting submission, and you stop. No other action will happen to that population of students. So we know that they're already being removed by the time that they would, there's no way for them to basically get past that to come into this rule. So we know by the time we get to this rule at a priority 30, that all those students that have got here have already submitted their applications. The same thing with the awaiting payments. Again, here we are unfortunately having to use a not statement, but we're using an application fee. But again, this rule is very much more efficient, separated out. But here we're saying we're capturing everybody who hasn't paid or hasn't completed the application fee. Then by the time we know that they get to the rank 30 or priority 30, we know that that anybody who's got here has already paid their application fee. So there's no reason to factor in those filters at this stage. As we move on, now we see, it's kind of the idea here is that we're saying if any of you, if those students haven't met those criteria of getting their required checklist items, there's no real reason to move them on to evaluate transcripts or recommendations until at least that part is done. Once that is completed, the student would then no longer qualify for that awaiting materials rule, but then drop to the second awaiting materials rule to be evaluated. So here again at a priority 33, again taking advantage of sticking things, moving something in between a larger priority scale. Now we're just looking solely at transcripts, and do they have any missing transcripts, and if so, then they're awaiting materials. If our particular record did not have any missing transcripts, then they would go back on to go to the next rule in the priority, so the priority 35. In this case, maybe we're a graduate-dominated school. Doesn't really matter too much, but we decided to put look at the graduate checklist items first. So here we see that we are adding in the period key. This is a very good way for combined instance schools to separate out the populations between students, is to either look at a round key or period key to kind of make sure that you're only affecting students in that particular round or that particular period. So in this case, we're saying we changed from our old bad rule to instead of saying not in undergraduate to denote somebody who's graduate to say we're in graduate. And then we're also saying since you're in graduate, you require at least 2 recommendations in your weighting materials. If a student is in an undergraduate period, then they would be this evaluation. The slate would look at it and say, yeah, this person doesn't meet this criteria for this evaluation, and they would then move on to the next one. So the next one aligns the 36 priority, and we say, all right, so the student would be an undergraduate, and then they are only needing to have 1 recommendation. If they meet that criteria, if they have 1 missing recommendation, or they don't have at least 1 received recommendation, then their weighting materials, once they get the 1, they would move on. So again, it's just kind of an example of taking a single weighting materials rule, breaking it out into 4 weighting materials rules that will run much faster and more efficiently than that single rule would. A couple of other things we can look at the exclusivity groups to take into advantage, to take how the exclusivity groups take some, the priority into as an advantage. The awaiting decision rule has no filters. And you see this from time to time when basically you're saying if this person makes it past all the other priorities, all the other rules in this exclusivity group and the higher priorities, and they have not met the criteria for them, this is a kind of a catch-all. And that means that they have a submitted application, they have paid their application payment, they have got their materials in. They're not, they don't already have a confirmed or release decision. So therefore, they must, by logic standards, they must be awaiting decisions. So we actually don't even have to have any filters applied to this. Makes for a very quick, very efficient rule. And we'll also take a look at something right here, just to kind of keep a note, for a lot of you out there. When you're building rules in an exclusivity group, you do not want to put too much stock into the estimated rows number. we know because of the other priorities that we really are not going to have 6 records get assigned awaiting decision, status, because they've already gotten picked up and assigned a different status based on the previous priorities. So it is something just to keep in the back of your mind, is to not get too hung up on the estimated rows when you're looking through your, building out a rules within an exclusivity group. Because the estimated rows is just looking at the filters as a whole and not necessarily looking at, the priority groups so just something to keep in mind. As you can see at the top, we have some some things where we are doing we're just saying, does a decision released? If that, then we're decided, and that's kind of where our priority ones start. And that's even starting before we even look at that, kind of applications, statuses in the sense of have they submitted or not. So again, this is an example of using these rules because over time you're going to have much more applications that are in a decided than you may have in a, possibly waiting payments or waiting materials. And the idea is you want to grab those and kind of, get them taken care of first. All right. So now we're going to go back and we're going to talk about the new rules formulas. So this here is in a Slate Developer Network article called Rules Formulas. There's much more detail in there, and I do in some of the examples that we're going to talk about are outlined exactly in that article. So I do recommend going to the forums and taking in that article. It's a very good article. It'll cover a lot of this in much more detail than what we're going to talk about here. Couple of things to keep in mind. What rules can use, what type of rules can use the formulas? And it's going to be your standard field rules, your application header, person index, your data set index and header, the username, and data set name. The field rules, just as it is, you're setting a field value. The application header, just for those, it's a lot of times we've done this in the past as custom SQL. With the formulas, it'll allow you to, again, kind of take more control into your hands as a user. So you'll be able to start kind of doing your application headers and person headers, on your own. Have your own control over that. But the application header is like if you wanted to not have a round, or you didn't want to have a round short as a tab, an application tab, that would be a rule that would overwrite that and put in a custom header. A person header affects the status bar, or the search bar, sorry. The search bar, the person header is the values that you would see that pops up underneath the search bar. And the person index are the values that you can search on. So by default, you can search on, a ref, student name, or ref, the Slate ID, the student name. And some schools want to do, birthday. Some schools want to do custom, like a Common App ID, Royal ID, etc. So those are, that's where you could be able to set that up under a person index with a formula. The dataset index header is the same thing as, kind of the person index, header, but it's for datasets, so organizations. Dataset username, again, this is again going to be something that's to be setting something for a dataset. To be setting a username. This is usually seen when you may have a portal or something like that that's accessing the username, and maybe a PIN needs to get generated or something like that. So it's an example there. Dataset name, we see this a lot. This is something that would be kind of on a lot of schools with the organization contacts is a good example, where you may have an import that's only being able to give you first name and last name. So you're mapping first name to first and last name to last, but you need a display name. And you want the display name to be both the first and the last name, maybe with even a space in between. So kind of a more formatting. A data set name would be a good example where you could set that display name to be first space last, etc., or last space first, or last comma space first. When it comes to building out the formulas, again, we'll look at that here in a second. You'll be adding in exports as part of these formulas. The exports are going to come in as their Slate-friendly names. Anybody with experience with the merge query, you'll need to be going back in and changing those Slate-friendly names to be something that's a little bit more, formula-friendly. And in those cases, you would basically be changing the names to make sure that you're not using any special characters or blank spaces. For the variables, to denote a variable within your formula, you're going to use an @ symbol. So again, we'll look at that here in a second and make a little bit more sense. And then the standard configurations for exports that you see in this, the standard query system works just fine as well. So if you did need to include translation values, if you did need to do format masks, or even set null values, that is all something that's standard built in within the new rules formula. So we're going to pull over a little example rule, a rule formula. So this is kind of this is an example that is in the article. So you don't really need it's all written out. What we're going to cover is already all written out there, so you don't need to take notes. You can go download that article PDF. So basically, what we have here is we're just doing a high score calculation. We're going to be inserting a value into the ACT superscore. We have the action that we select for this is going to be replace values from formula. So some of you see those in the fields where you see replace values from custom SQL. This is a little bit different, obviously. Now we're going to be doing replace values from formula. When you do that, you'll get the add export section in here. And as you see, we've added 3 exports: SAT, SATR, and ACT. So when you click on this, say for example, since we're doing a high score, we're doing a kind of a super score. We want to make sure we want to get particular types of scores. So we go to our Slate template library, and we can add in a super score. And so say for example, we just want to make sure we're getting the ACT super score that's verified. As you can see, the Slate, like I was mentioning earlier, the Slate friendly name pops in here. ACT superscore verified. This has spaces, so we don't want to use this as a variable. So what we can do is we want to just click on it, just like you would in a merge query or in a normal query, and you can see that where we can change the name. So we can say whatever we want. So we're just putting our friendly name here for our formula. And here we can also select any sort of translation values that we want to use. Since this is ACT and we're going to an ACT superscore, there's nothing to translate, so the value that we have already will be just fine. If we need to do any sort of formatting mask, doing some conversions, we can set that here, or making sure that something's coming in the proper format. We can do that here. We'll talk about that here in a second. And then we have the null value. So if there is somebody did not have, for whatever reason, an ACT score, and you wanted to say something different for, probably not necessarily for a high score calculation, but you'd always say if it's null, say this instead. So in this case, we've already kind of set up our ACT. So we've kind of already set it up, just ACT. We already know it's a direct value. So let's go ahead and remove that. When it comes to our SAT and SATRs, now we need to put them all on the same scale. So our ACT is already on the proper scale, so we don't need to take into account any translation values for that. But for our SAT and our SATR, we do need to put it on the ACT scale, so our calculation makes sense. So here, what you do is you can go to the export value section, and in the export value, you choose your translation export. And then you choose the scale you want to go to. So we know that this is going to be an SAT score that's coming out. So we want to do an SAT to ACT translation. And then we go to our SATR, same thing. We want to take our translation value, and we need to take our SATR to ACT translation. So now the variables are all on the same scale. So our ACT is going to come out as a regular ACT. Our SATR is going to be converted to an ACT, and our SAT is going to be converted to an ACT. The example formula is also in the article. As a matter of fact, all the example formulas we'll look at are all in the article currently right now as well. What this formula is simply doing is saying select max, or select the highest value from the variables, and you'll see that this is where we're now noting to look at specific new exports. So variable of ACT, variable SAT, variable SATR. And so we're saying get our max value from, and look across those 3 variables. And so whichever one's highest, take that value and then insert it into the superscore field. So this is kind of, You could do all sorts of basic formulas in here if you wanted to take, you're dividing, multiplying. The main thing you want to keep in mind here is that if you kind of run into, if you need some help or working through a particular formula, that's where Technolutions can come into play, or a service desk. Tell us what you're trying to do. Give us an example of what you're working with, and we can help you formulate a formula. This isn't SQL per se, so it's not doesn't really work in the the way that SQL does. I mean, it does and it doesn't. So the idea is to be kind of be really user friendly, and so we do plan on having probably some more examples out there in the future. But for right now, if you do need to move forward with something like this, for example, like a person header or an application header, you can always reach out to us for some help creating that formula. All right, so the other example that we're going to look at is going to be kind of a little kind of combination field. So as a matter of fact, it's going to be one of those, it's setting an application header, for example. So here we have another formula. Here we're taking the period year. No translation value is needed because we're not taking we're just taking the year value from the period that an application is created in. The one thing we do want to keep in mind is the format, though. So the period is a number, and so we want to make sure that we want to format it properly. So we want to set it as a string, and the reason why is we want to make sure that if some another value gets in there, that it doesn't kind of blow everything up because a non-number is found. So it is important when you're building out your your rules formulas that if something is going to be a number, for example, if you have you're doing like another type of rating score calculation, that you're setting that as an integer or real, just in case an import comes in, and it would be set then as a string opposed to an actual number, or be set as a when you import something, it's going to be set it up as as a text field, not necessarily as a number. So it's important to make sure that you're telling the formula that you want to factor this into the formula as a particular integer, or real number, or date and time, or something like that. So do just kind of keep that back in your mind. And again, we're more than happy to help you here at Technolutions to make sure that the proper format's getting selected. Which is always just, if you need help with that, tell us the value, where it's coming from, and how you plan on using it. So again, we're just taking the period year, and then we're taking in a term. Both of these would have had different friendly names. We've obviously seen we've cut them down. We removed the spaces, made them very simple. And the term, so we're taking in our a term field. So the term in this case is a fall, spring, summer, and the period year, of course, is the year that you put in on the period. So. All right, so in this little simple formula, as you can see, we're just taking our two variables. We're going to add in a blank space, so we have a nice little, so it looks like, so in this case, it's going to look like 2017 space, and then the term value, which may say fall, spring, or summer, based on the application that is selected. And then this formula is going to, because it's set as an application header, would then basically overwrite, what you may see on your application tab. So for example, in my particular test instance, I have things broken into a graduate application and a freshman application. And if you didn't want to necessarily see freshman application as the header, and and it's more important to you as an admin to see the entry term that this person is applying for, then in this case, you would see 2017 fall or spring or summer, based on what the student may have selected in the term field inside the application. Another good example here is the null value for when it comes to term. Because this may be something that's being set, obviously applications are created, you'll see the tab prior to application submission, so the student may not have selected a term yet. And so it's important to, if you wanted to have some text in there, so instead say 2017 and then maybe not selected or no term, etc., that you would have in place, just to kind of denote that the value has not been selected yet from the student inside this application. All right, so again, these are going to be the example, the existing example formulas that are out there on in the Slate Developer Network article right now. So feel free to go over there, cut and paste them down, and again, there's a lot more a lot more instructions in the article to define the formulas a little bit more exactly what they're doing. So we're going to open this up to questions, and we're going to start with. All right. So we're going to start with the questions that were submitted via the form the registration for the webinar. All right. So our first question says, does the quantity of rules, how the rules are written and load on other schools impact our instance and how long rules take to run? So like we talked about earlier, the rules run in, within 15 to 30 minutes. That is kind of the norm. And they, the way that the processing is scheduled is that the rules evaluations, it may only take 3 minutes for those rules to actually all to run, but it may take the 7, 10, 15 minutes, 18 minutes for the deferred process to hit that mark to run the rules in a batch. So that's why you kind of see that, kind of sometimes the rules may seem like they're running within a minute of action, and sometimes it's going to take them longer. One thing to keep in mind about the efficiency of rules is if the rules are not, are not very as efficient as they should be, then you can kind of monitor a little bit with the deferred queues over here on the right-hand side. Basically, what you look at is it passes, and we look at the average time. If your passes are not going down and your average time is getting longer, that's a good sign that you've got some bad rules and you need to address them. Using the check rules option is a very good trick. If you do see that very high numbers, you also may notice it on records where it says there's 3,000 minutes since for a force update or something like that. It's a very good time to check your rules at that stage in the game. Checking the rules when not much is going on in an instance can kind of make it look like your rules you're working just fine. It's really under load, under stress, where you're going to see kind of if the rule is really efficient or not. But the duration is going to be something we do say that anything kind of below 30 seconds. We really want you to gun for below 10 seconds. So do keep that in mind. The shorter the duration, the better. And again, it doesn't matter if you have more rules. If you have 10 rules that take 1 second to run, that is more efficient than having a single rule that takes 10 seconds to run. All right, so is it possible to set up a 24-month email campaign to prospects by program, which begins based on entry date and person and automatically sends entry date of the person and automatically sends each month? The prospect will move out of the campaign when they convert. This can be accomplished with populations. And so while there are rules that set populations, those rules can be within the exclusivity groups that set that population who should receive the mailing. I think this is probably something a little bit more, we do, and again, a couple of things. We do keep a timestamp of whenever the population is created for the record. So that you'd also use that timestamp to daisy chain your mailings off of. We do have our Slate TV video webinar using the Deliver for automated communications plans, drip marketing, and text messaging. So I do recommend checking out that webinar Wednesday for that, and just kind of applying what you may have learned today and making those population rules more efficient and applying that to what you can glean from that webinar. Okay, so how do you prioritize rules to be higher importance than others? For example, when staff assign members to records, we want transfer students to be assigned to a particular staff member, even if they live in a state that is assigned to a different staff member. So this goes back to a little bit we were talking about with the priorities on the rules themselves within an exclusivity group. So if we kind of take that example of a staff assigned rule, and you have your different, the whole idea there was if you want somebody who is a transfer student, who is a student type of transfer, to be picked up and and be set up a higher priority, then you simply want to set it with a higher priority. So that rule will run and be evaluated prior to the other rule that's evaluating their location. And so those people will never reach, those students who are transfers will never reach that lower priority rule because they would always be picked up in the higher priority rule and assigned to the proper staff. So that's, again, just stressing the importance of priority and how you can take, you can make sure that you may have subsequent rules in that list, in your exclusivity group, that can affect the student record because the student would meet the criteria for them, but because you always, because you know that they're going to be a transfer or something, they should always go to somebody else, then that's you just set that at a higher level. And then if for whatever reason it was discovered throughout the reading process or something that they really weren't a transfer, and that status would change upon that update, the rules would fire. Then they would get the other staff assignment because they would no longer be no longer be considered a transfer student. So it's priority. It's what's really going to come down to setting that, making sure you want to think through your rules completely, and you're going to want to decide which ones should be of the higher priority. All right, so is it possible to declare and manipulate variables for calculations using the new formulas feature? So here, the exports that you add to the rule are the variables that are available for the formula. They can use in the formulas as is, or can be manipulated in the formula. But maybe that might be something in your service desk request you put in for a little bit more clarification. The idea is, you have your export that's doing manipulation to an extent, especially if you're setting up translation codes. And so if so you're already kind of in a way in the process of manipulating even this export before it even, when it's even put in here, before you even put it into the formula below. Then what's in the formula, then you can also even further manipulate it in the sense that, if you're going to be, for example, dividing it by 2 or subtracting or multiplying, etc. That one you may just want to put in a service desk request for a little bit more clarity, or if that's what we're talking about, again, then that's fine. But again, you're already kind of doing in a way, we're taking this variable. This is actually a super score variable of the critical reading plus math. So we're already kind of in a way making doing some manipulation at that level. And then we could even do a further manipulation by saying it's a particular, make it now an ACT level value. So, all right. So how can we automate a decision release? Well, to ensure that a rule is not improperly written and would release an admit-deny decision to an unintended population, decision reply rules can only be used to add and release decisions that have prerequisites. So, for example, deposit pay decision would have a prerequisite of admit decision. Prerequisites can be set on the decision. You would set it on a deposit pay decision, for example, in the decision admin tool. In addition to any filters that you would add to the rule, this will automatically ensure that the decision is not added, or is only added, I should say, when the prerequisite decision already exists on that record. It's a great kind of check and balance that enables you to build automations around the reply decision without the potential to compromise the release of an emit deny. So the main thing is, within Slate, your best practice is always going to be, is to have the human process to actually put out that emit or deny decision. That's something you're not going to automate in Slate. All right, so how can we fire rules only when a round has been changed? So basically when a round is changed, or a field is saved, or anything, an application scope field is saved, that will trigger the update for that particular record. So rules run on applications anytime application is updated, including a round is updated. Rules should be designed in a manner meaning that they can run and rerun and have the same outcome as achieved. If you're seeing something like that, if it's not working the way you're expecting, do put in a service test request and with examples so we can look at that. But yeah, the rules, especially application rules, will run whenever a round is updated or an application field value is updated, or even on a person level, is updated. So it's just whenever there's an update that's queued onto the record, and that can be, again, the import of a value, again, the update of a round, etc. Okay, so when writing simple rules to set a field value, do rules run more efficiently in an exclusivity group where all the records that are not affected are first kicked out, or is it better to write a single rule to set the field for the people that do meet it, do meet the criteria? This is going to be one of those questions. It depends. If you're using the same filter over and over again in the rule, saying take no action. So for example, if you had the same filter over and over again that said not in graduate round, and you were adding that to 5-6 rules, then yeah, you would want to use an exclusivity group and have a not in, if you're in graduate, do nothing, or take no action. But if it is a single rule, and that is all there is just a single rule, again, you can filter for the affirmative. So if you're not in graduate, then you say that if you're on the freshman round, so in freshman, set this field to freshman type, etc. Then that would be a case of just having a single rule. So you want to think through that, and you want to decide, are you repeating the same filter over and over again to remove a segment of your student population? And if so, yes, use an exclusivity group. If no, then if you can just say who it is and have that, who it's for, then just filter for the affirmative and set the field and just have the single rule by itself. So is there a way to use rules to add a particular interaction to a record? Yes, form rules can indeed add interactions. You can have rules that regular rules assigning interactions to student records. A lot of you are probably doing this already, where you're adding a payment due interaction or activity based off of form submission for either enrollment deposit or an event payment. Of course, the decision reply forms, an example of using rules to set an activity interaction, is another good example. So yes, you can use rules can be set up to assign interactions activities based on a form submission or even by themselves. So we have a question: how complex can formulas be? Just like any other, so the more complex your formula is, the more apt that it's going to be harder to understand for future staff members as you get promoted, win the lottery, retire. Somebody else comes in to fill your shoes. They may not really know. They look at a big gobbledygook of formula, and they may not be able to see what it's doing. We do recommend keeping your formulas short and sweet, because again the more complex, the more robust, the bigger the formula is, the longer it's going to take that rule to run. So you again maybe something where you find in the check rules section that it's taking a long time for that rule to run because of a very complex formula. So do keep that in mind when you're building these out. They can go out to a level of complexity, but again we want to keep them short and sweet. So we have are there ways to organize and visualize data set from previous years, alumni data, etc. with Slate? Yes. The report builder allows you to organize and visualize the data. You can use Voyager. One of the feature released during the summit allows you to visualize data geographically. We recommend watching Slate TV videos on, basically on the training lessons for Report Builder, the Fancy Feature Friday on Voyager. If that's not really answering your question about how rules would affect that data, then I do recommend putting in a service dash request and being a little bit more specific. All right, so I learned that checklist rules do not work after a period is made inactive. Are there other types of rules that stop working when a period or round is inactive? When it comes to an application period is inactive, checklist rules are very purposely not evaluated for those applications. From year to year, you may alter your checklist requirements so the rules kind of freeze the checklist from previous year. It prevents previous year's applicants from being inadvertently updated from those changes. And so this is, it's very much done on purpose, because a good example is if someone applied, last year as a freshman, and they got their checklist set, and you saw that they did not finish X, Y, Z, and then the next year you're changing you're changing those checklist items for X, Y, Z to be different values, and the person applies again, and you wanted to compare what they actually finished this year versus what they didn't finish last year, or vice versa. So we do freeze those checklists, right? Those things there. Checklists are the only set of rules that play off of any sort of inactive period. All right, so for reader bin rules, is it best practice to create rules by bin order? So all reader bin 1 rules in priority order, then reader bin 2 rules in priority order, etc. When it comes to the bin movement rules, we do not recommend automating bin movement rules beyond like the initial move to the bin 1, the reader 1 bin. And the readers are always able to move applications to the next applicable bin, or they completed a read, or if once the completed read and read 1 is completed, the reader can always send them over to a read 2. For bin movements prior to that, for example, if you're have bins for awaiting submission, waiting payments, waiting materials, you'll want to use filters that restrict the movement to the applications that are not in the bin yet, or that are in previous bins, to prevent backward movement of applications. So the idea there is you're not saying if you're in the read 1 bin and your awaiting materials, pull you into the awaiting materials, because you may have a situation where you administratively move somebody from awaiting materials to read 1 because they're the dean's son or daughter or something like that, and you want to prioritize a read. So we don't really want to set your rules up to move backwards. It is recommended that you go in order of your bins. Awaiting submission is your first bin. You should have a rule that that's a higher priority awaiting submission. Waiting payments the next, and so forth. Waiting materials is the third, and so forth. So we kind of recommend that kind of that bin flow movement. Since the bin movement rule should be restricted applications to only those pre-read bins, rules will not impact applications that are currently being read. So the only thing, the only thing I'd say there is that you will see it from time to time where you don't want to give your reader in the read 1 bin permission to actually move the record. We do see that for some schools who really want to clamp down on the readers, not moving students ahead that shouldn't, or et cetera. Kind of the recommended solution there is to see what you could do off the reader review form and have a rule that fires off reader review form submission opposed to firing off of a deferred trigger or something like that. So you may have a situation where if someone needs to be moved to a processing bin, or they meet, the reader clicked all the right boxes for for their review form to allow them to go to the read to bin. That would be an example of a bin a rule that only fires on form submission. So it's not always being evaluated back behind the scenes, and you only know whatever gets fired when that form is submitted, and you can look at values on that form. But we really, again, best practices is really to kind of take it up to the first read, take automations up to the first read, and leave it there. And then, we can always talk through those special circumstances. So, can rules be associated to project manager? I'm going to assume that we're talking about project tasks. In which case, any page in Slate can be assigned to a project task. So they definitely can be managed in that way. If that's not the crux of what your question is, definitely you can always, again, reach out to us in the service desk request a little bit more specific. Can a rule be set to have the highest priority set on the current application and have tab open? We have applicants apply to different programs in the same term. Yes, you can create rules that set the application priority. The application priority is the first item looked at when determining the overall application rank. So you are able to specify applications to have a high priority. So you can set a rule to, so in short, you can set a rule to set the application priority to, so one program is always a rank 1, or vice versa, or whatever set of criteria can always make a particular application a rank 1. Is it possible to run rules in a certain order based on exclusivity group? For example, can we run exclusivity group number 1 first, then run exclusivity group number 2 next in Slate? No. Rules are evaluated in a parallel, and actions are taken in batch. So, which means that the rules cannot be based on the result of other rules. So in kind of that scenario, exclusivity group 1 and exclusivity group 2 would basically be run at the same time. To kind of, if you need, if you need one value to be set for another value to fire, you want to incorporate whatever that first value is in the second criteria. So that is something that you probably would want to reach out to the service desk requests for to work through, because it's going to be, you're going to have to evaluate whatever you're setting in exclusivity group 1 in a single exclusivity group, essentially. Is it possible to write a rule to assign the person, not the user, for an inbox message? No. Inbox attempts to match onto an existing record if there's a single record that has the sender's email address. If there isn't a unique matching record, then the message will automatically be unassigned. The message can be assigned or reassigned from within Inbox, but this is not something that can be automated, unfortunately. So that is it for our questions. Do you want to show kind of one last thing to kind of keep in mind when it comes to audit log updates? Are now, audit logs will show you some things that kind of keep in mind. So we are, in the audit log, we are setting when a rule makes a change to a field in Slate. In this case, we have a current student location field, and that current student location field is set to Constantinople. We then have a rule that runs, and that rule then, we see where the current location was unset from Constantinople, and then the current student location was then set to Istanbul. by clicking on the set current location rule over on the right-hand side, that would take you to the rule, and it would tell you how, why that particular value got changed. But that's just something to keep in mind in the audit log. If you're having some things get switched around, you're trying to figure out how they're getting switched around, you can always go to the audit log and see if it is something that's being done by a rule that exists in your instance. Thank you for joining us today, and of course this will be recorded. You guys have a great, wonderful week and a wonderful weekend.
Everything is awesome. Everything is cool when you're part of a team.